Hey man, it's Tom, cannabis industry lawyer. You can find me over at that website or on this YouTube channel. We're going to be talking about cannabis licenses today with Nick Easley from 3C Consulting. Going to be great. So if you're one of those entrepreneurs that wants to get a cannabis license, I'm going to put this one in the playlist. How to Cannabis, check that one out. And of course, one of the requirements that you very often have to prove to get a license is that you're over 21. So let's get into it. Oh, what's up, everybody?
Hey.
Nick is breaking up some herb, and Nick Easley's joining us. How's it going, man?
Good afternoon. Seems like we're all in the Midwest, pretty much other than Illinois. Not much cannabis things going on here, but I find us here today. So really honored to be here with you guys.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell the audience what you do for a living?
That's kind of a long question there, but I'll keep it brief. I'm Nick Easley. I'm the CEO of 3C Consulting, also managing director of Multiverse Capital. Originally from farm country in Wisconsin, was a cryptolinguist for the Air Force, speak a variety of languages. Got hurt and found Colorado in 2006, became a medical cannabis patient, and then started working for the first commercial licenses in Colorado and then other states. So we've done medical licenses 37 out of the 39 states and adult use work in 17 out of the 19 states and jurisdictions, including DC. So work all over the US and all over the world, mostly on getting cannabis licenses and starting new businesses.
Nice. Yep, Nick, and that's okay. I mean, it's great. No, I've known Nick for over a couple of years now. They do great work, and so if you're into, because like he's opinionated, which is fun, and so like he likes to have a specific type of facility that he would like to construct for his cannabis. So what style of facility would you advise a possible cultivator, a cultivation license hopeful, to consider?
Well, a lot's going to depend on like the country or the state. So if a state does allow like 4-season hybrid greenhouse, that's like my favorite, to where you have light augmentation, deprivation, Dutch Venlo style like glass greenhouses. Still about a third of the cost to build an indoor, compared to that, and the OpEx is maybe a fifth of the cost. There can be huge HVAC, dehumidification, CO2 needs, but when you look at the embodied energy of producing cannabis indoors compared to greenhouse, it's a much more expensive to build and operate those buildings, and a lot more to ask of the planet. So when we see price compressions happening, which we caused in Colorado, California, Oregon, Washington, you name it.
Coming soon to your state. I don't care how limited the market is. Yeah.
Your $3,000 a pound indoor seems like a great idea until people are selling $1,000 pounds from greenhouse that cost them less than $200, including testing to do. So we do some big, large outdoor Colorado operations, as well as Colombia and multiple countries, but 4-season hybrid greenhouse for 5 harvests a year, CO2 augmented, really the highest quality flower at the lowest. So that's usually what we recommend. I've done up to 300,000 square foot indoor facilities as well. But when I see the cost of production, the scalability, it's really hard to maintain that market share unless you're a kingpin where there's only so many licenses in a state and you prevent new licenses from coming into that state. Not going to say that, Illinois.
Oh, I'm sorry. I coughed that into the microphone. Yeah.
Pennsylvania, Ohio, Florida, some of the others. So you really have to think not just it's a cannabis license, you got cultivation, you're going to be able to do massive, revenue. It's more of what do they use to produce other agricultural commodities? What's special about cannabis? How do we match agriculture and cannabis with what you can do with compliance and maximize and focus on that, scaling it out phase 1, 2, 3, 4, like never starting in a small building and having to move to another spot. When you think about licensing, any state, if you're going for Mississippi right now or thinking about Alabama or Florida, you wouldn't want to start with like a 2-acre site. Once you have parking and setbacks and fire turnaround truck, spend $5-10 million building a cultivation center. Demand grows. You can't just add on more bays to the south or expand. Like you really have to have a site that'll allow you to start smaller and continually gradual up as the market demand requires.
I love that you brought up greenhouses though, because no one ever talks about greenhouses, even though like that's the origins pretty much of like the cannabis industry, right? Like Up in Smoke, it wasn't like the greenhouse being raided or being watched. In many greenhouses, and also greenhouses are diversive, whereas it can be into like, it's about light, right? That's what helps build the heat in the greenhouse. So if you're like in Alaska, you're only good for 6 months out of the year. But if you're in, like you said, Rhode Island or something, but here in like Washington State, right now, Tom and I were talking earlier and how it's getting more light out here again. So, and I really did myself a disservice as far as like I have some clones that I just put in the windowsill. So, the light cycle got really weird for them. And so they only grew up to, I think I'm growing a gram right now. But the point is, how do you avoid that in a greenhouse? Like the lighting situation, do you create like little dark areas first? Is that going to be part of the rotation that you're talking about?
Yes. So in order, 5 days ago, pretty much like one of the most important days for agriculture, like the summer solstice, like the longest day of the year in the Northern Hemisphere. And what that means then is like, I'm going to have way more than 12 hours of light and darkness. So, traditionally cannabis, it germinates from seed, it does vegetative, the summer gets longer, and then like, the days start getting shorter. And it knows, I have to reproduce because I'm going to die here in about 3-4 months. Now, instead of us making the day a little shorter each day, what we do is we do vegetative for about 18 hours a day, and then we'll do flowering for 12 hours a day. So what we would do at this time is we have light curtains, dark blackout curtains that will completely automatically close on the top of the greenhouse. And it's pitch black in there at 7 o'clock at night. Those then open at 7 in the morning. So we have a photo period of 12 hours of darkness, 12 hours of light. Now in the winter, December 21st, you might only have 8-9 hours of light. So the lights would turn on at like an hour and a half before sunrise. And then as soon as the sun's up high enough, those light meters would turn off the lights. Once the sun starts going down, the light meters notice that the micromoles are going down. So then these augmented lights turn on that kind of boost the light up so that they can have a 12-hour day for flowering. So we always add light augment for vegetative days, but then for flowering days, we're either like light deprivation, like blackout curtains, or we're adding a little light to always maintain those 12-hour days.
Yep. Pretty interesting. Light meters, automations. Sounds like a fairly complex greenhouse that you build.
4-season hybrid greenhouses before coronavirus. In the United States, I could build those all in for about 100 to 150 a square foot. Based on coronavirus costs, delays, steel, glass, other things, I'm anywhere from like 150 to about 250 a square foot. But indoor,
which is still ridiculous. Okay, go. Yeah, he's getting to it, everybody. So, like, if you're thinking about building an indoor, smash those likes, and then Nick's going to give you some truth on some numbers.
In indoor, if you were before coronavirus, $250 to $400 a square foot, including like purchase price and renovations, that'd be pretty decent. Right now, I'm seeing closer to like $300 to $500 a square foot. So even though like you're like, oh my gosh, 4-season hybrid greenhouse, $250 a square foot, that's including land, parking lots, pipe work, rainwater collection, solar backup systems, like augmentation, deprivation, natural gas generators, like on and on and on. But these systems, when you think about cultivation, it's all about the environment. So where is the best place in your state, let's say based on daytime highs, nighttime lows, frost-free days? Where's there an opportunity zone? Nothing to do with cannabis, that's in a municipality that's opted in, so that you can build something that's going to give investors massive like returns that they don't have to pay capital gains taxes on. That's going to be scalable, because small scale indoor, it worked really well 10 years ago. But now when it comes to people producing 500 pounds a week in some of these greenhouse bays, if you're not able to do that, you can't compete. And no matter how good your flower is or amazing your brand is, or
I'm the best grower in the world.
At the end of the day, if you're like top shelf eighth is $65 and ours is $25, and ours is sun grown and has 1/10 of the environmental carbon footprint, I don't care if someone cares about the environment or not. Most people, about 95% of the time, vote with their dollars and what's consistent, what's readily available, what resonates with them. Some people will still buy cookies indoor. It's great brand, but when there's something that's 1/3 of the cost, it's just as good, if not better, eventually consumers will dictate who stays around, and that's all based on efficiency and cost.
Is there a climate that greenhouses are best in? I mean, I think they're diverse, but is there like versus the desert versus where I'm at in the Northwest, rainforest land?
Well, greenhouses, I've designed cannabis greenhouses all the way from Alaska to near the equator in Colombia to the bottom tip of South Africa. We've built over 60 acres of greenhouses for cannabis in the United States, and internationally about 40 acres. The biggest thing that I think about, not only like opportunity zone, because to build something new, I want to make sure the investors aren't going to have massive tax hits. Humidity is the biggest thing, though. There's different styles of greenhouses, from like cheap plastic hoop houses all the way to like Dutch Venlo, glass, polycarbonate styles that do all air filtration. So if you're in a really humid place, You can't use like wet walls, like swamp coolers that the air passes through. I can do those in California, Arizona. But once I'm in a humid place, I have to have HVAC, air conditioning, dehumidification, air movement, CO2 enrichment, integrated management associated with that. So pretty much I could put a greenhouse anywhere. It's just going to be more expensive to operate it, or the systems would be more expensive to do it. But when I look at Florida, for example, where I'm, actively preparing for license work for these next rounds, the first greenhouse that VitaCan did back in the day, it had no ventilation, and they were growing poinsettias next to it, failing all their pesticide tests. And everyone thought, like, hey, greenhouse won't work in Florida. Look, VitaCan failed. It's like they didn't have any like air movement systems, no mechanical, no anything. Of course they had mold. Well,
Yeah.
when you build the right system, especially not in Orlando, like let's say somewhere like in northern Florida, where you're 300 feet above elevation, you're not hurricane food near the ocean, and you're not in some like low-lying swamp, humid place with alligators. Those few places in northern Florida that had opted in, none of the existing operators from OMU have put their cultivation centers there. They're all in really expensive indoor down in central and southern Florida, which is hot and humid as hell. So even indoor is way more expensive to do. But the few wise people, hopefully self and some groups included, are going to be putting their cultivation centers in the best agricultural climate in the state, because we can't import from other states to Florida. What we produce in Florida has to be sold in Florida. Now, long term, if you put a giant greenhouse in the wrong spot in federal legalization when it happens, when you built a 10-acre greenhouse in Maine, well, your heating costs are going to be astronomical compared to somebody in Arizona. All those giant like glass in Florida or others, or in California, like great climate, great place, but the tax rate's so high. How is that going to be competitive long term? So, if you're going for licensing, you have to think what's going to work for us now for the cultivation methodology, processing methodology. Never just think like I'm going to grow and sell my trim or raw material. Like the most valuable aspect of this industry is soil to oil, growing cannabis, making oils and consumer packaged goods. Retail at the end of the day, you're buying something for $50, you're selling it for $100. But if you can have,
and you can't deduct any of it on your taxes.
Yeah, it's still federally illegal, but we pay close to $10 billion a year in federal taxes. So that's kind of saying something. Like they don't rate us as long as we pay our taxes.
So, yeah. We kind of got diverted here on the greenhouse subject because I find it amazing. I think it's an opportunity that people should think about. But the subject here is cannabis, and you have 3 licenses, right? Like Tom said that you have 3. You actually own.
No, he's got licenses in places.
Hundreds.
Yeah, but I mean, as far as like your play, right? Because the common person sees like MSOs as being the big players here. How can the average guy? Because you're a veteran and you're someone who probably didn't come from a large bean. So how did you get invested into this?
Some of the right place, right time, and it was mostly like a selfless basis that I realized when Colorado went from like medical caregiver to the first commercial medical program where we could have like LLCs and go for licensing. I started with some of my friends like that were caregivers saying like, hey, you guys got to like switch over and do this paperwork. So we started just navigating compliance, and from poor means, disabled vet, bought some land. My strawberry house in Colorado still doesn't, off the.
But you were part of the medical in Colorado then?
Yeah, I started in medical in Colorado 2006, and then did the caregiver program until 2008. Helped to get some of the first medical commercial licenses 2008 forward. Probably did 100+ licenses throughout California for groups, and then by 2012, when we legalized recreational, like regulate marijuana like alcohol, I helped to do some of those first licenses for some of the first stores and cultivators selling on January 1st, 2014.
Nice.
Yeah, I've been around, I think.
Right place, right time.
Yes.
Very beneficial. I got in Illinois. That sucked.
But that's the thing. Like Nick, this is what I find amazing about this whole evolution of the industry right now. And there's a lot of misconception, right? Because we think anybody with money is a big creepy person that's already been in here. But then again, medical, when you have a lot of legacy people like yourself, like you're a legacy Colorado medical, and then in Washington State, dude, there were so many opportunities. Like here in Washington, my advocacy, I'm like, look, I don't want to grow the hamburger. I just want to go to the goddamn drive-thru and pick it up, right? Like I don't want to. I'm growing a goddamn gram, right? Like I want to be able to I smoke more than a gram a day. Like this, it's not sustainable for me. But when it was medical, there was lots of opportunities for me to even get involved. I could have grown clones. I could have sold it back. I could have reinvested in shit. But I wasn't thinking like that. I wasn't thinking this is my opportunity to be involved in what's going to be taken away. And like, so you had a really good opportunity with the medical, and your MSO is actually, or not MSO, I'm sorry, but your business, your consulting business, has actually been there and done that, which I think is kind of neat. That like you see a lot of people just going, oh, I smoke a lot of weed, I can consult. You know?
Yeah, we realized without licenses, nothing would happen. And then not all licenses have the same value. So how to ensure like whatever it takes from compliance, story, team building, and capital. Because I saw great companies that could grow better weed than some of the largest MSOs out there, but they couldn't put together capital stacks and understand how to do property management companies that would own the buildings, triple net lease those to the operational companies. I see 420 blinking. I think this is exciting.
Yeah, it's 20 past the hour, and it is 4:20 in New York. So at that time, we take a small smoke break and we do a bumper.
I need to.
That just really coincided to what I needed to smoke. But you know, that's the problem here because like we're facing shadow banning and all that. That's why we use the bumper, and then we use it to promote Tom's, collateral base. If most people, his firm, as most people don't know. I mean, he's an actual business. I'm just an advocate, man. Like I have nothing for sale except for, I don't know, hugs. I don't know. I got shit.
You're selling hugs now, Miggy?
Hey, you know what, dude? COVID. I'm taking risk.
Well, I mean, the thing is, we're all advocates in this space. I mean, even being on the board of directors of ASA now and being able to help work with Americans for Safe Access, pushing bills in legal states, it all comes down to like, raising capital versus like raising donations. It's like fighting a war. And if you don't have bullets, you can't fight a war. And with cannabis, based on our tax problems with IRC 280E, the high cost of compliance and operations, if you don't know how to raise capital or put together financial models, it's impossible to even take a good concept and get it to like proof of concept to like speed to market. So that's like the biggest thing that we saw, like how to get licenses, how to help those people do that. And if you don't focus on the things outside of how good your weed is or how amazing your story is, and even the value and importance of social equity and diversity in the cannabis industry, that can't be your only selling point to bring in an investor. You have to be unique. You have to be something that's got scale. And in this space, I mean, we're going to be larger than alcohol and tobacco combined long term. But the companies that can go through this bleeding stage of this next 3 to 5 years, or a little bit longer,
3 to 5 years, we're lucky. I mean, like I would have agreed with you, and then they stripped safe banking out of the omnibus package, and I'm like, that was its only hope. You can't strip it out of that and say it's going to get through. Ugh.
Yeah,
so 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, well, we got a little bit more bleeding. I've been saying 5 to 9 years for federal legalization for probably the last 5 to 9 years, and we're a little further away. But Kerr, Moore, Schumer, I mean, Blumenauer's, and Dana's originally, like everything's been good and it helps things and it's good for stocks, like for that press release value. But the main thing, like to make us no longer applicable to IRC 280E, is if we amend our Controlled Substances Act to match the UN and the WHO, since it's been amended now for 2 years, and make us a Schedule 3, because IRC 280E is only applicable to Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 narcotics. So that alone, boom, that changes everything and allows medical proliferation around the country.
Yep, that's how that stupid provision of the tax law was written. Now, they could also just put an asterisk on it because they do revise the tax code all the time. Just be like, except for licensed marijuana sales. But they don't want to do that because the law's already screwy enough. And it really does suck because it only affects those two. But then all the federal crimes that arise from the banking, because you're in a Schedule 1 substance, the way that the banking federal crimes are written, I just can't believe that they just can't cross out the word marijuana and tetrahydrocannabinols from the Controlled Substances Act and move on. I mean, talk about a one-page bill. It would just be Cross It Out Act, the Cross It Out Act. But what about all the other stuff? We're going to regulate all that other crap. That'll be coming, but only after it's legal, Well, let people out of prison, for crying out loud.
Descheduling, but I think unscheduled, right? Like, why is it even, like, where's alcohol and tobacco? Are they on the schedule?
No, they're regulated by a different bureau.
But again, why? We're talking about a Controlled Substance Act. Like, this is about everything. It's a blanket. What are those? Are they magically not substances? This is not a But Nick, you've been how you've seen it though, because here in Washington with the regulation, there was lack of in medical, right? And that's why I got rolled over and just ran over, because a lot of people saw dollar signs. But when Tom and I talk about regulation, we think as kids, like, oh, I buy a quarter pound. I just want to be able to sell this quarter pound without going to jail, But to do that, I'd have to originally buy that quarter pound from a lower selling market, licensed, and then pay my little 10% tax fee, and then sell that back with the markup, because I'm trying to get my money back plus the taxes I sold on that. So, like, regulation's not as easy as we think it is when you're just like, man, we just legalize it, because the beer.
Yeah.
When you buy your beer, those guys have licenses and all the same shit.
Yeah.
Or Viagra.
It's very similar. When you look at like liquor distribution licenses, that's like really what determines whose beer gets from one state or craft beer gets to another. We're going to see some massive changes like that when federal legalization happens, how this like individual rollout of like state by state states' rights will play out. And then there's going to be protective clauses on some of these industries that created some pretty large titans, even though their stocks don't look like they're titans right now. But they're going to.
Hey, one thing that I do like about looking at their stock prices, they're finally starting to have an EPS that's not like X, so it's like, hey, look, it's actually a 38 earnings per share or something like that. So you're starting to see multipliers that aren't just, oh, this is a mythical unicorn dragon that will continue to grow perpetually,
Exactly. But those companies now, that even though most of those MSOs have about 60 to 65% of the market share of all the cannabis licenses and jurisdictions that are actually doing revenue. Granted, there's tons more licenses in Oregon, Washington that are not part of those organizations, but the limited license states, which are nearly 80% of those states, and most new states are limited. Like, even though North Carolina bill, the House is probably not going to vote on it this next week, which is really sad, seeing that the Senate passed it. But that was going to do 10 licenses for full verticals. So when you think about, like
the whole state,
and that sadly, Tim Moore and some of the others are not going to vote on something that the Senate's already voted and passed and brought to them. Really, really unfortunate for medical patients there long term. But when you think about Alabama, it's going to be very similar. Only a few verticals, but Mississippi, tons of licenses, but churches just disqualifies about 95% of all the real estate in the state. So
churches
churches, they're 2,500.
The setback for churches. Oh my goodness, that would be a data visualization to watch.
We've made that database, and I did the same thing for North Carolina. 2,500 feet for churches was part of that act. And when you look at that, like door to door, you can get waivers from cities if they say, but even 1,000 feet from a church in Mississippi, that knocks out about 90% of all retail zone properties in the entire state. So when we're navigating state by state, you're thinking, where's a license that's going to be valuable? Somebody might have a cultivation license for sale in Oklahoma right now. I don't care when there's thousands of licenses and no central distribution. But if it's a state like Florida or Alabama or a few that are only going to have very limited licenses, that's where it's so critical to find a position, find those investors and others that are going to be able to help you like execute on that plan. Because you won't win licenses anymore in these states unless you can show financial backing. Even if you're social equity, you got to find people that bring all of those stone soup components to the table, no pun intended, and then you got to tell us this thing that's possible. But if it's just the social equity story or just the money story or just the cannabis story, you got to have all of those things come together to be perfect.
Yeah, the perfect applications. That's where it's at. Now,
perfect. Sometimes the states don't grade them or just choose their friends. That happens.
Correct. And you can have a perfect application that's complete. Like, it touches all the bases. If there was points, you have them. Now, unless, of course, they start adding in points regarding money. Because there's one thing about buying a perfect application. It's like, no, here's a complete application. It may not work as well for you because you're just a guy. But that happens. And then how do you like screen then for, and it's difficult. I mean, there's very few people that are out there that are actually ready to take on a Florida license, especially with all the crap that a Florida license entails.
Yeah. And so like that Florida program, it's kind of unique. Everyone thinks about Trulieve and MedMen and Curaleaf that like have really taken that market. But Florida through the OMU originally only had 19 licenses. They did the Pigford license, which we should hear about any day. It's like the African-American farmer license, because they're like, oh shoot, we gave all the licenses to 19 rich ass citrus farmers. let's like do some diversity, even though that's taken 3 years to get there for one license. There's 12 applicants currently. I heard it got knocked down to 6 that are still remaining. And so there'll be one license for that. They did charge more for that license than any others. But this next round, Act or Amendment 2, the Florida law for medical cannabis, it says when the OMU got to 700,000 registered patients, they had to issue an additional 19 licenses. Now the state's actually said we're going to issue 22. I'm hoping that means there's going to be some social equity provisions. But if you're interested in Florida, it's a king or a queen maker license. Once you get your vertical, you have cultivation, manufacturing, and one retail spot required to get that. Once you have that state license, though, you find another compliant property in a city, you get a second dispensary, a third, 120th in like True Leaf State. So they're taking the state as we speak, and they're now at 732,000 medical patients as of this Friday, and adding about 3,000 a week. So now the state's 6 weeks behind issuing these new licenses. But here's the nitty gritty. If you want to go for Florida, you have to apply with a company that has 5 years of history in Florida.
Oh, good. I'm filing the Dormant Commerce Clause suit as we speak.
Well, seriously.
But it's a requirement in many states, and that actually, not a lawyer here, but like that argument's been used and lost in Florida because they're a very agricultural minded state. First round, you had to have a 30-year citrus farmer as part of your organization. Second round, a 25-year citrus manufacturing partner. This year, it's like row crop experience, but you have to have a medical director that has very voluminous experience, cultivation director, manufacturing director, retail director, medical advisory board, audited financials for 5 years for that Florida company.
Jesus Christ.
$5 million type bonds showing liquidity. It's a serious license.
Serious license.
I've seen those licenses sell for.
So, hey, hang on. Your audio kind of cut out there. Can you say the number of millions of dollars that you've seen these licenses sell for again?
Over 80 million.
80 million, everybody.
Yep. Work almost 247 million cash for a tie for selling that. It's one of the 5 cultivation licenses in New York before the governor signed that hemp bill, giving all the hemp farmers cultivation licenses for cannabis, which we're still kind of like, what happened there?
And I hear next week processors. And how do you get a processor license? You were a hemp processor.
Yep, for the first round. Exactly.
Yeah.
But in Florida, those licenses in Florida, are they vertical licenses? Or are they just grows? Vertical. So 25.
Yeah, you have to have cultivation, manufacturing, and one retail to get that license. But then once you do that, you can get 40, 50, 120 retail locations as part of that one license. So this will be the last round. And this is my opinion here. This isn't fact, but I'm not guessing, let's say. This will be the last round of like vertical licenses in Florida when adult use happens, in the future, a year and a half, which it will. Then they're going to issue like kind of like Illinois, like new little classes of licenses. And here's like a small cultivation or a manufacturing only, or like one retail, or maybe like home delivery. But the delivery licenses in Florida, you can do that as part of your vertical. And it's not like some states where you can only deliver to someone's home address. I could deliver to a Taco John's parking lot and have 20 people waiting for me. And just
that'd be awesome.
Florida is the most non-compliant, easiest, and best for patients. Not so much the safest, but there haven't been many instances of that. But it's nothing like Massachusetts, like where you have to have body cameras on 2 people, $250 a product or cash in the time at one time, no more. So Florida's
ridiculous.
If you're looking to get into it, you have to look at what were the last 2 license rounds like. What's the Pigford license look like that was due in March that they'll announce almost any day, and how to have a very diverse 5-year company with all of that experience. You have to have properties under contract, like with site entitlements, and they have to be compliant. But Florida, this will be the last round of like the big ones. And most people that did it early, even though we think they're titans, like truly even others, they did very inefficient indoor cultivations. They had massive crop failures. Their cost of production is way high. They're growing where it's hot as hell, or they flower during the day instead of at night for peak power costs. So Florida is the time to like think about, if you're going to do it, you don't have to repeat the same mistakes of the past, but still a cultivation manufacturing facility, you're going to be looking at 20 to 40, maybe $50 million of like capital expenditures in order to do that. So
and greenhouses don't finance as easily as brick and mortar buildings, do they?
New build ones surprisingly do. Like Focus Gross, Power REIT, a lot of the cannabis specific real estate investment trusts or private high net worth investors or family offices that do that, they know Not only does the greenhouse tell the ESG, like environmental social story, they also know that long term, this asset, compared to me putting 30, 40, $50 million into an indoor brick building, if they can't grow cannabis to save their life, somebody could grow basil, aromatic herbs, tomatoes, peppers, other crops, microgreens. An indoor cultivation facility, though, it has no value outside of cannabis based on the large cost of production.
Yeah. Price per pound, trying to get that like sub $600 in an indoor facility.
Yeah.
Good luck on that. Yeah.
Well, if you look at cannabis benchmarks, side note, part owner helped to start that years ago. But when you look at the cost of production of indoor versus greenhouse or outdoor in some of these states and what the current market spot price is, I mean, in Colorado right now, you could buy a wholesale pound of the most fire best cannabis you've ever seen for less than $800. That same pound, in New York would be selling for $2,400, $3,400, $3,200. It's just where it's being sold is kind of like the issue. But if your cost of production on a cultivation standpoint is over $400, you're a dinosaur already. A meteor is hitting the Yucatan and you're like, oh, look at that pretty shooting star. And like, everything's going to be great tomorrow. Like, yay. But realistically, you're extinct. So you have to be thinking about that long term.
Can you do the layered grows in greenhouses? You know how sometimes somebody's building indoor grows, doing the tiered grows. Can you do that? Are there grows big enough like that? Grow houses?
You can, but the sun is most important. So like imagine a greenhouse is like a giant solar panel. Like by that thermal mass and being able to have direct sunlight come into it, like with good southern exposure, that's what's most important. Now, as part of a greenhouse, we will have indoor rooms under metal roof that have stock plants or mother plants, early vegetative like V1, the cloning, V2, like when they're in a small little 4x4 like nursery container. We'll then harden those off, like get them used to natural light, back in the artificial. Like most people don't know, if you took an indoor plant outside at 10, 11, noon, anytime, put it outside for like 5-10 minutes, that plant's going to die because it's never had full spectrum light. You're like, I was on life support and now I'm like eating, and they die. So we have to harden off plants and get them used to that. But in a greenhouse, anytime, even I've seen asinine growers use those like 4-foot wide, 4-foot LEDs that just like shade the whole greenhouse, thinking like, oh, we're going to have multi-spectrum. It's great. It's more of when you late vegetative or flower, those are single level, but we'll do multi-level in like the early vegetative stage, but we don't want shadowing. Yeah, there's greenhouses that have these benches that do this. Okay. We want to keep greenhouses just like any cultivation facility, single level. When you have to do multi-level and have ADA, you've got water upstairs, water downstairs, power everywhere, HVAC, like retrofits that are double level, I won't even do them anymore. It's just too expensive and they're not scalable.
It's not worth it, is it?
Yeah. Depending on the state, but some states originally wouldn't allow greenhouse, like Pennsylvania and other states. We had to educate the regulators on this, like 4 walls and a roof. They're not just going to throw rocks and get next to the greenhouse and like run away with a bunch of weed. We're more worried about employee theft or like being the transporters having an issue, but not actually at the greenhouse themselves. But any operator currently, like we went indoors to hide when this was made illegal, but most cultivators a long time ago would grow outside. So our technology as cannabis growers really evolved indoors. Most people just don't have the foresight to look forward and think like, actually, how we know how to do this is just because of the situation. Now that we can do this in the sun again, like large scale indoor, long term, that's where all oil is going to come from for edibles, either from Colombia or big states where it's just massive combines, like flower outside with no CO2, but great for oil, high UV content. But then most large scale flower operations long term where you can do CO2, it's going to be from these 4-season hybrid greenhouses.
Yep, that's going to be interesting to see, and it's going to take years. And I always kind of people love the financial models where it's just up and to the right, and we're going to be printing all this money, and they want to believe them so badly, and so they don't get the next steps. Like after they get the license and they get that facility that they're going to sink like $20 million into, and they're going to be paying like $600 to $700 a pound, and they're going to be selling it for like $3,000 a pound, and then it's like, well, what happens when this happens? Well, what happens when that happens? None of that is considered, which is kind of interesting. Many of the people that when I say, well, what type of facility do you want to design? Well, I'm just trying to put the application in your company together. I'm not going to sit here and tell you how to run your business. I could, but you asked for help. So it's a lot. Everybody still wants to grow indoor, and trying to talk somebody into a greenhouse. Sometimes you have to actually convince them of it. Like they're shocked, and I'm like, what do you mean? How are you shocked? This plant for thousands of years grew in the sun. It wasn't like magically growing in somebody's basement well. Sure, you had like taken all the stress from it, so like it's not going to get hail or wind damage or anything like that. But what do you think a greenhouse does? It's going to be preventing all those things. So you still got to control the environment to a large degree, but you get the sun.
And the most important thing when it comes to cultivation, when you think about nerdy Bill Nye the Science Guy, go back to middle school and like photosynthesis, like chlorophyll more like borophyll, but like photosynthesis, it takes sunlight and water and CO2 and makes glucose and oxygen. So the more CO2 I have, the more sunlight or water. It's not about some fancy spectrum of this, or it's not about like I have more phosphorus during this stage or this magic little thing that doubles my production. But when you can do CO2 augmentation and get that up to 1,500 parts per million in a flowering greenhouse, you're literally producing about 30% more biomass and the quality flower, like more linked internodes, like better flowers. So we can't do that outdoors, and you can do it indoors, but it just costs you 4 to 5 times more to do it. And the bleeding heart environmentalist in me, I remember standing outside LiveWell's cultivation center in Denver years and years ago and watching these coal cars just going by, and I did the equations and I found out, I'm like, wow, like every gram of indoor cannabis takes over 21 pounds of coal to make that amount of electricity just in coal. Not even the HVAC or the manufacturing or the scissors or the light bulbs or the kids making this thing in China or that. Like, so every time you're like, I love the earth, and you smoke a joint of indoor weed, that's 21 pounds of coal worth of electricity you just ask from the planet so that you can literally have a weed to smoke. And we can do that. In houses. We can do it outdoor. So we really got to start doing consumer education on this. But at the end of the day, most consumers might not care. That's fine. If we can make the good choices for them, it's also better for business. Like if I produce something that's high quality, lower than the cost of my competitors, and it's way more environmental and safer for my workers, I'm going to take the market share by undercutting them on price. And eventually we've been trying to put indoor out of business for over a decade. It's my company, just because it is an environmental atrocity. And most people, like you said, Tom, they don't have the courage to look at other cultivation methodologies. And that's why there's so much embodied energy in the industry that's not working out pretty well.
The sun grown that you can get from California or other locations in the United States that are amenable towards outdoor growth. That's just so much more vibrant. It just has so much more flavor. And I don't know. I just think it's because people have this real geeked out kind of nature. When they see a rig that's indoors, they just like, wow, there's so much science going on. And they like that. And they don't want to go back to like the sun. I don't need the sun.
Well, they think it's cleaner too, right? There's this misconception that it's grown in this like little lab, it's cleaner. But Nick, has there been a study perhaps on like a greenhouse being next to a hemp grow and cross pollination? Has that been looked at?
Definitely a big problem. Yeah. So just like the males of our species were the troublemakers, it's the same with cannabis. It's a dioecious plant, so it has a girl house and a boy house for the sex. And no matter what you try to do, like to keep us away from like the nunnery or whatever, like we're going to find a way in. So with cannabis, we just have to be really smart with our facilities. One, like when I worked in Portugal, I was said, you should have your hemp grows on this part of the country and your cannabis grows in like these parts of the country because they can cross pollinate. We always don't get that lucky. So whenever there are hemp existing operations, or I'm scared of pesticide drift or other things, we'll have UV lights like in our intake ducts that are denaturing the DNA of any viable pollen. You could always have an employee come into work, put in their uniform and have a pocket full of pollen and just throw that around some flowering plants and literally F all of your plants. A little bioterrorism.
Disgruntled employee, by the way.
We've seen it at operations, but
wow.
That's why we need to talk about the employee handbook policy plants.
And uniforms and bag checks and not letting them.
Seriously, wow.
Oh, seen that. We've also
seen the industry.
a disgruntled employee take mycobutanol Eagle 20 and spray it all over dried curing cannabis so that they would fail pesticide tests and like have bad press. I've seen that too. But yeah, in this space, like any of those outside like threats, be it from integrated pest management, from viable pollen, pesticide drift, those things have to be thought about and isolated from the type of greenhouse entity. You think about Green Dragon's greenhouse in Denver, it's right next to I-25. So it has all the exhaust of all the cars going right into the greenhouse. But you can walk on a sidewalk 2 feet away from their intake ducts that are directly into their greenhouse. So I'm like, I just like take pollen. I would never do this. But those are sorts of risks you have to consider, even if it's natural, if it's human done. And the same sorts of risks can exist for manufacturing or for dispensaries. But for greenhouses, you do have that drift, but indoor has those same problems if they don't have really good air scrubbers, UV in the ducts, and like closed air handling systems.
Mm-hmm. Crazy. I just the human element of the industry, by far the worst element of it. Yeah. Most of the problems, from the law to the regulation to the disgruntled employees or the bullshit partners, everybody's just pissed for whatever reason. All human element of the plan, But still, we punish it. I don't get it.
The thing that we do now, like what I've learned in, even though all my military experience, ag experience as a kid, none of it was like based on cannabis, but I love the cultivation part. Sadly, that's the part I hardly get to do anymore, because what I've realized, to do this industry well, you need a certain piece of paper that allows you to do this so that you're not just like breaking the law. If you're going to do that, just know that the risks for the illicit market, I still have friends in that space, not that I could remember who they are, of course, but they're taking massive risks that are like bigger risks than before for less gains. And it's never who you sell it to that's the problem. It's like who they sell it to, or where it comes back down, or some angry girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever it might be. I mean, I know more people that would take a 24-hour risk driving from one side of the country to the other with something than would grow something illegally in a state for 6 months and potentially get caught with a bunch of baby skunks in their basement, Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sad that we have to be in this position now, but the most important thing for this industry now that's going to give you value is the piece of paper, the license to cultivate, manufacture, deliver, sell, test, whatever it might be, and doing whatever it takes to maintain the compliance for that. And I mean, Tom knows this. I know this all too well. Licenses are more and more competitive than they've ever been. And in these new states, you've got people in that state that have been waiting to do it, patient right groups that are excited to do this for the right reason, farmers in that states, people that have drug crimes in that state that want to do this, plus all the multi-state operators that want that state and the single state operators that want that state. So what used to be 90 applications for 10 licenses might be 900 applications for like 10 licenses. So you've got to know the rules. Just like I said with Florida, like if you don't have a 5-year-old company, you can apply, you're disqualified.
Yeah. You can have a perfect application, but the only problem is you don't have that 5-year window. That's when we sue for the violation of the Dormant Commerce Clause, because you are clearly being prejudiced. Well, especially if you're an out-of-state actor. If you're an in-state actor, I'm not sure if you have standing to raise the issue. And so, like, if you're somebody who's operating in California and you want to operate in Florida, and they won't let you.
Well, but there's your big problem, though, Tom. If you're a California entity and then you actually apply for a cannabis license in another state, you're now subject to RICO. Not like your buddy RICO, but like racketeering and like mob stuff.
But again, it's all about those.
And the money is still there.
Yeah.
The money's if it's medical, so if you're in California and you reach out for the Mississippi medical, and then at least we'd be able to say, but there's precedent that says, hey, get out of here, get out of my stuff. You got to give me an evidentiary hearing to make sure that I'm actually violating the medical laws.
But you would, anytime if you're going for a new license in a new state, if they don't have the clause like Florida where it's a 5-year Florida company, you always want to make a brand new entity in that state for jurisdiction to limit and like the risk to that state. But also remember, the state's allowing you to break federal law in their state. How can a state allow a foreign corporation from a different state or country to violate federal law within their state under a state law? So that's where it's like knowing the rules to play the game. That's why, I mean, some of the lawyers on this call on your network, Tom, have done great for our clients and others in the past. And anyone that's looking at this space, like really good knowledge about the space and legal understanding of it to like cover your ass before you actually put everything on the line and realize that you forgot one detail. And now like you're getting sued, you're losing your license, or you're going to jail. Because at the end of the day, still federally illegal. And it's not just this massive opportunity we have. It's a huge responsibility because these new states, they're trying to figure out how to regulate this. The federal government, OSHA, FDA, USDA, they're not giving guidance to cannabis operators in states. And even if we had a state lawsuit that then like goes past the state Supreme Court and goes to the federal Supreme Court, since it's federally illegal, they're not even going to hear it. So that's why most of the Illinois lawsuits aren't ever going to make it anywhere, because they're state jurisdiction courts. And somebody kind of tells the state courts what to do in Illinois, or multiple states. But
yeah, there's all those things. It's going to be an interesting thing that gets ironed out. But the Dormant Commerce Clause says states aren't allowed to prejudice one another. And all of these things, they're all prejudicing that state and self-dealing for that state in violation of this Dormant Commerce Clause. And so it's a meritorious argument. But will that eventually be something that helps it? Because if Congress isn't going to do the job, will the Supreme Court strike it out? Just be like, this makes absolutely no sense. And, they didn't do this as much, prior to like 1930s with their ability to just allow, and then the Wickard v. Filburn, like the huge amount of supremacy for the Commerce Clause. But, the court's going backwards. So maybe they'll go further backwards to like freedom of contract and shit. And be like, hey, don't tell me how many people I could put into this bakery for how many hours.
It's getting the point. It's really unique. I mean, the things that we're seeing federally, and even like this last week with like Supreme Court kind of announcements, it was one of those things you're like, wow, we're a little bit more concerned about things that used to just be like, normal and accepted. And even with the cannabis industry happening, I mean, so many of us on that day had to think like, what's this mean then? How do we still honor human rights as our companies and allow something to happen or facilitate this for our employees and our families without actually potentially breaking another federal law or
You would think at a time though when women lose rights and guns gains rights, like in between, we could just find a way to be legal, like something that's overall for everybody. Like any prohibition has proven to be a total failure. How do you guys think though it'll be like viewed in the future, as far as like this is one of those laws that prove like law in itself is a construct, right? Where we're law abiding, we all agree we're going to abide by this as citizens, but yet like when it's medical, I have the affirmative defense, but when it's now recreational, I have the paperwork defense. At what level does the law become like it's fucking a law? Like it's like a known, like let's not put people behind bars, like common citizenry, we agree, like I can look at a cop. We have this fear about like, the cops. The only thing that I'm scared about cops is because of weed when I'm out on the road. There's no other reason why I'd be afraid of any
other person. Fucking with you if it wasn't for the weed laws.
Pretty much. There's nothing I do. I mean, slow driving sometimes, fast driving. I don't do shit. I mean, at least not worth going to jail for. I'm not saying I'm a perfect person, but Jesus.
Well, it's just in the glorious words of one of my good lawyers back in the days, he didn't advocate breaking the law, but he's like, if you were to break a law, you would only want to break one law at a time. So like, don't be drunk and speeding, or like smoking cannabis and speeding and drunk, which you should never do any of those things at the same time anyways, or singular. But if you're going to do something weird, only do one weird thing at a time.
Exactly.
Take it one crime at a time, everybody in the industry,
At least one where everybody agrees upon it. Because that's what you have to do. Because this is what it is. It's a crime that we all agree upon. But then, at the same token,
we don't all agree upon it. Just it's one of the reasons why
in it, though.
We participated unwillingly. We're unwilling participants in this. Yeah. We're trying the best we can to figure out how can we end this yet. How about now? And it's just not going to get done, because once you make something a crime, you're actively overt, like the policy is suppression. And so like you can't get your rights because you're advocating for crimes. Like you're advocating for the bad thing that they said we aren't going to be doing. And then people out there with church, they're telling their parishioners, this is a bad product to use and they shouldn't be doing that. Like church should not be in our laws at all, because that's what Saudi Arabia does. We try to avoid that,
We've got a unique opportunity here where, it's hard, especially like seeing what we just worked for over a year in North Carolina, putting together with like Senate Bill 711, the Compassionate Care Act, and then all of a sudden they're not going to vote on it. But we have to allow doctors to make decisions about healthcare for their patients. Like, we don't need to make decisions about somebody's body as a government, like allowing a doctor or an individual. So any of these state rights, whenever it comes to state medical cannabis programs, like, I'm a big proponent of adult use as well. But at the end of the day, as a disabled veteran, like, my main focus and mission is making sure that all medical patients that would need safe access to cannabis in the United States and the globe have access to it. Adult use will come because we realize it's medicine for all of us and it should have always been legal. But step by step, if you start with a medical focus, medical advisory board, medical standards, and also know no matter what you're doing in the space as an individual, like, there's others just like you. And we are stronger together with our voices, in our petitions, and also in how you do applications and business plans. So even though, like, you might go to a conference and there's a lot of people all trying to get into that same market, let's say, you might not have all the missing pieces to do that. I'd almost guarantee you don't. So it's always who's left of you, who's right of you. Like, you need finance, you need somebody with ID verification experience, someone with legal experience, somebody that has, good diversity kind of background for, like, company employees and titles. Like, whatever it is, just get strong, get together. And the more that we work together, like, the larger your chances of, like, success in these markets are going to be. But when you go in alone and just kind of get angry about the laws and you think you're going to, like, win one of these licenses because you've got one of these pieces, you got to have so much good diversity, so much experience now to do this and pull it off.
You need a team. I mean, we're talking about an industry that is being created as we go. This did not exist when I was 20, and if it did, I would have figured out how to get into it instead of what I do now. I'm working in tech, but regardless, it's here, it's being created. We're further than we were before, but people need to understand that piece of paper is essential to, like, creating the industry. Like you're saying, you need a lawyer to help provide with the backbone. You need someone. If you have someone with sales experience on your family, like Nick, you were saying, when you got started, you got friends together, right? So financial gathering. What they say, when you invest in something, you get your friends. You ask for your friends and family first, because they don't invest with you. Who's gonna?
Yeah, yeah. Friends and family is a good place to start with. And in early days, they didn't have all the voluminous experience, like, required on these apps. It was more like, you're property compliant. Do you have this sort of background? Are you, like, a resident? Because residency was always a huge thing in these new states back in the day, which is now not the case. And it's been thrown out in Missouri and multiple other markets. Also, another thing to look at, like, if you don't have those residency points as part of your team, like Alabama, like, they're giving very few verticals. 51% of the owners have 15-year residence of a state like that. So,
wow.
I don't have that, I can't do it. No, that doesn't mean you can't do it. It means you need to find some homies that have that experience and be willing to
But that means they got to give up control, Nick, and they don't necessarily want to do that every day. They want to, it's theirs.
Well,
theirs. Yeah.
That's the thing, like, even Jeff Bezos, like, he's got a board. He owns less than 20% of a company he founded and co-founded. So we only do things strong and big together. And, like, all big things started small. Even if one person did it and owned 100%, would you rather have 100% of a personal pizza or 15% of a pizza the size of the Astrodome or, some giant place?
Right.
Really the scale. So if you don't have those experiences, there's always ways that you can put in operational controls, either through the operating agreement, employee handbooks, day to day. What does the board vote on? The voting of shares. So when I read a definition, even though I'm not a lawyer, 51% of the owners must be, 15 years there. You're like, okay, doesn't mean that those owners are going to have Class A voting shares. Doesn't mean they're going to have C-suite titles or have anything to do with the day-to-day operations. But it would meet the definition that 51% of them are owners.
And therefore compliant, and you get the points.
Exactly. So sometimes they might have a weird requirement, but you got to know the rules to play that game. Never work around something. Never ever lie on an application. Like, not only could you go to prison for that, but if you end up finding out later that you lost a license over something that, like, you fibbed on, I've seen this happen for teams. They'll take it away, and every time that you apply in a new jurisdiction, they're going to say, where have you lost a license before? I've never lost a single cannabis license out of over 250, US and international. But anytime you lose one for compliance, you have to report it on each and every app. And do you think they're going to give you a new license if you lost a license for non-compliance?
Right. And why did you lose that license? And that may happen. There's some of the 40 that got released last year for the craft grows. Their $20,000 to $40,000 payments are coming up in a month, and I'm sure that some of the teams don't have it. But
Multiverse Capital, we've definitely had some interest from teams just to pay the renewal fees on either transport or craft grows that haven't done anything since they were issued those licenses. And granted, Illinois is a program that is kind of scary. When's that 5,000 square foot gonna, increase? Why did all of the big MSOs get transport licenses and social equity worked hard for transport licenses and then now have no value in that?
Mm-hmm.
And that's
why did certain ones get more than one craft grow? Why would you have applied twice if you knew that you could only have one license?
Well, you could have ownership in up to 3 craft grows if you read those rules correctly, which to me, I'm like, just because
then why would you apply 3 times in the first round? That's what I'm saying.
Odds, right? It's all about the odds. But then again, like you're saying for like Alabama versus the MSO outside, right? Guaranteed there's somebody with 15 years residency, some 15-year consumer who's been like, man, I want to be in the weed business all my life. And then you got this big creepy MSO saying, hey, once you sign this contract, but number one, have a lawyer read the contract. Nick, I don't know if you're familiar with an old activist here in the Oregon area, Paul Stanford.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So are you familiar with his saga, how he actually lost his name and everything? So the company that he went in business with expanded their stocks, did some weird shit that I don't understand, but they made him a non-entity when it came to votes, which is like, have a lawyer read your shit.
It's critical. Some of those things called like fat shares and others are different classes of shares. A common thing that we'll have to deal with like, oh, you couldn't sell the license for like, let's say 36 months or something, and it has to be the original owners. Well, how do you raise capital or equity investment into that? And the way that you'll do that is through like a convertible note. You can also have one of those original owners pledge their units as collateral as a contingency-based finance agreement. So you're still compliant, and then that can trigger to change equity after like that period or that window. There's always a way to deal with some of those clauses. Just never do any backdoor stuff. Side letters are like, all right, Jim, you're going to hold this equity for me. And then in 3 years, like you're going to give it to me. It's like those sorts of contracts, verbal or not, can be very dangerous and can make you lose a license too. Just once you go into the compliance side of this, from like the illicit side to compliance side, it's all about compliance. And there's never like walking between the worlds. It's one or the other. You can't have a foot in each world. It's all about one or the other. And if you come into the compliance side, just know it's going to be bigger, more fruitful, less risk, and actually viable business long-term that you can talk about, other than like, I grow cows and sell tomatoes at the farmer's market, even though everyone knows you don't have any cows or tomatoes. All about that compliance.
It's a very interesting industry, and it's very capital intensive. And a lot of the people that call are the startups that are very interested at that tertiary level where they're just starting to call somebody. They're shocked to find this out. How do you handle that when the people are just, what? How? Yeah.
Well, it's one of those things that, if somebody normally said like, oh, I could open a dispensary for like, $250,000, $500,000. I'm like, no, you actually can't.
Thank you.
Like, let's first think on like the real estate, and let's just be fair and say like, you're going to buy a building, let's say for $250,000. Perfect. That building, to get it compliant, furniture, fixtures, and equipment, pre-construction, site work, engineering, environmental assessments, traffic impact studies, lights, counters, fire suppression systems, security systems. That's on average about $500,000 for us for each dispensary. Like waiting rooms, bulletproof glass, security cameras, and everything. So $250,000 buy the building, $500,000 to like retrofit it, like to like building permit, architects, engineers, lawyers, land use attorneys, you name it. So now we're at $750,000 for the propco in that, example of a retrofit. Now the opco, the dispensary itself, I don't ever like to start a dispensary with less than $500,000 of operating expenditures, like staffing, marketing, branding, hoodie design, my package design, my floor mats with my logos on them, the website, the Leafly listings, the weed map listings, like the printed pamphlets, the staff, the toilet paper for the bathrooms, like landscaping, trash costs. Like I need at least $500,000 of OpEx to get to cash flow positive. But here's the really fun one: $500,000 of initial inventory. You think someone's just going to front you like all
shit?
So you can get debt financing now for inventory purchases, about 8 to 12% based on credit. But normally someone's like, yeah, I could do this for like $250,000. I'm like, well, I just showed you your prop co there. That's 750. Your opco is $1 million. So 1.75 million for 2 companies to start a dispensary. Like what? But that's enough to cover the debt, have staff, hire good people, have benefits, employee packages, packaging, marketing, online ordering abilities, pre-order pickup, security, compliance, lawyers for your license. Like that's where, yeah, like 10 years ago, yeah, I could start a dispensary for $250,000. I couldn't even, in some markets, work to get a license and get started for $250,000.
Yeah.
Property.
Florida, especially, I'm sure. But
Florida's
that's the industry, guys. Thanks for tuning in.
The application fee for the ones that I'm talking about right now, it's $150,000 non-refundable application fee.
Non-refundable, wow. Man.
Granted, one could say that would really be a barrier to entry for like minorities, lesser means people to get in the space. And I'm like a poor farm country kid. But like if I wanted to open a new casino in Las Vegas, do you think are they gonna have a social equity program for that? Or like, oh, you had a gambling problem, now you can be Steve Wood.
Yeah, exactly. Isn't that so strange though? You have a gambling problem. Well, how would you like to own a casino? But then that's kind of like, oh, you were ensnared in the cannabis prohibition because you were, using or selling it illegally. How would you like a cannabis license?
And these things, it's totally unfair and it's totally effed up. And we need to like work to make this change. And we can't make it all right overnight. But one thing that I do know is if we make the wrong arguments and we just get angry about this, nothing happens. And the big schmucks own the industry and sell us garbage and kill the planet and profit off of it. So if you want to do this, what's unique about your skills? What market are you looking at? Is it the right market at the right time? Like, let's make a big grow in Colorado. I'm like, why? There's 1,100 of them already. And like they're selling pounds almost the cheapest anyway. So unless you're going to come in big at scale and efficient, why would you go into an established market? And some of these markets that look established, they're not, like Florida or Massachusetts or Illinois. It's just they've been very controlled by key small individuals. So think, who else do you need as part of your team, and not make the argument like this sucks, this isn't fair, this is a racist industry. There's been major problems with it. Yes, it continues to grow, but we only can grow together. You need the finance experience. You need the people that do HR. You need good tech background people. You need people with the story that people are going to be engaged in reading and supporting. It can't just be your story or the best weed ever. That's usually less than 5% of what's important to a company. Even though good genetics, good cultivation is really important, I can train a greenhouse manager who grew poinsettias for 30 years how to grow cannabis in less than a day pretty efficiently. Then they don't have bad habits either. So,
nice.
Yeah, master growers, I usually call them master F-ups, but they're not master business. A lot of them, and some that have scaled into this, but using their skill sets as part of an ecosystem of a company that can work, but never let one person's ideas design the whole operation. It has to be like, what's worked in other jurisdictions? Can you show us that? Do you have references on this? Can you grow more than 100 plants at a time? Can you grow 20,000 at a time? Very, very, very different.
Yep. And these are all elements of due diligence and other things that you should be doing in your corporate entity that you have, because you have a team and you're making decisions and you're trying to get one of those licenses. But very often it's an entrepreneur that thinks he's going to be able to hold the whole thing. And I'm like, you're from Oklahoma, aren't you?
I mean, that's a state that you almost have to use metric again after almost 3 years of not having to use seed to sale tracking because it was too hard for them.
Well, now they're actually coming around to closing that out. It's going to be one of those closed markets come August where no more licenses unless. So if you're in Oklahoma, like I have a buddy who's that 2-year limit, his shit's about to hit right after that when they close the market. So there's a lot of bullshit going on over in Oklahoma where they're closing that market and doing things. But Nick, you bring up a great point about best practices and eco-friendly and whatnot, and the consumer, which most cannabis consumers don't want to trash the earth. Is there any labeling that you think will be out there that we can say, hey, this one's been certified, not green. Sure, it's been using or organics, but also in a greenhouse or soils.
We have seen and that's where living soil companies and others. Something you got to know about. Cultivation, we've all had crappy Cisco tomatoes that look like a tomato, don't taste good at all. And you're like, what is this thing? That's usually a hydroponic tomato that was grown through crappy commercial agriculture in a greenhouse, maybe. But remember the environmental impact of hydroponic to make not only rock wool or like all of the different nutrients, like very intensive processes with acids, bases, and temperatures, like for phosphoric acid, Haber-Bosch experiments, things you can make literally like atomic bombs with that we use as fertilizer. You're like, So
and how do we ripen it? Ethylene gas?
So just know that some of those things, they're not the most environmental. State by state, I have seen like certified sun grow. A lot of people come up with these certification processes, but none of them are super bona fide or accepted yet. And there are tons of companies that do massive greenwashing out there too. I mean, not like a 7th generation or others, but so we do have a need for that. But whenever you can see like greenhouse or outdoor and like choose and see if you can like try that. We did blind tests with like over 100 consumers. They couldn't tell from look, taste, or, from like most greenhouse to indoor cannabis. Like there are times you can grow some really, really good indoor, but at the cost of production, no. So we're still lacking some of those testing and certifications to like show that operators that, right now ESG is sexy and a lot of investors need that. And also consumers are starting to pay attention to that. So,
and it gets back to the capital raising.
Yeah.
So like it's going to cost you a lot of money to do either one. And so which one are you going to have an easier time getting somebody to strike a check that's not in the hundreds of thousands, but in the millions?
Always millions. Like I can't do anything for 7 figures for almost any sort of company in this space. That sounds cocky and arrogant, but it's right.
It's a fact,
It's an expensive industry. And if you want to get in, like if you wanted to make a hotel, if you wanted to make a restaurant, it's capital intensive. You got to get buy-in. And just because you're going to grow weed or some amazing CBD dog biscuit, so are a million other people. So what's unique about your license? What if you can't grow weed? What's the value of this building that you're asking $20-30 million to build? Like what happens if like the one person who's so good on your application that grows weed, what if they die or get hit by a bus or lose their mind? You have to make companies that are insulated of individuals that can operate like thinking like a company instead of thinking like a mountain.
That's it.
All those different things is to really get investors to say yes into this anymore.
SOPs.
SOP is very true.
SOPs are helpful for gathering dust. Daily checklists are great for like the day-to-day workers that make those like go from really like big things down to like what's most important for the day-to-day workers. But having compliance checks with those, audits for those, not just buying templates that aren't about your operation.
Right.
Like, these things matter. Like New Jersey right now just won a bunch more retail licenses there for adult use. It takes them 2 to 3 months to go through like all the SOPs that weren't even a part of the application for compliance checks while you're building the license. So if you wait, build your license, get your certificate of occupancy, and then like go to like start growing and selling, they're like, hey, we need to see all your SOPs. It's in the law. So like you have to start on some of those things early, and you could be spending $50,000 on building some of those things from scratch. And if you haven't ever done it before, like at least do your homework to know what's going to be required for those, because the documents, especially my international operations, winning a license is about 80 to 90% based on the documentations and GXP standards.
GXP,
like good processing. Oh. Like GAP is good agricultural practices. GACP, more important than GAP, good agricultural collection practices. GMP, good manufacturing practices. GDP, good distribution practices. GLP, good laboratory practices. And Global Grasp, which is like fair trade for that. And then there's also different versions by continent, like EU GMP. So if you're producing cannabis domestically, one thing to really look at are international GXP standards that the US will require when federal legalization happens. So if you don't want to stop your operations when federal does, start doing OSHA standards now, USDA standards now. An awesome thing, hemp is legal under the Farm Bills and Ag Improvement Act. So the USDA is already giving pesticide guidance to hemp farmers and like genetics and stabilization requirements, methodologies. It's the same plant, it's just a different, variety of this, like based on drugs. So look at what the USDA is telling hemp people to do. It's going to be probably pretty similar to what they tell cannabis people to do long term. And never use a pesticide that's not allowed on tobacco. Even though that seems crazy to most of us, that's the only other agricultural commodity that has pyrolysis data about burning it and smoking that plant after pesticides are on it. And that's the USDA has really already said that. And we did in Colorado as like the pesticide work group. Like that's the only one we have data for what happens when you burn a pesticide and inhale it. So let's only use things like that keyed up to like our specific problems. But you shouldn't need pesticides if you grow correctly and have a good IPM plan, beneficial insects, guardian plants.
You put beneficial insects in the greenhouses?
Oh yeah, every single greenhouse of ours has about 20 different species of beneficial insects, from like nematode bases that live in the media that fly around. I mean, I even use some sorts of sprays where it's a fungus that its favorite food source is like a different type of bacteria that might hurt cannabis. Every one of our greenhouses has lemongrass. We'll have eggplants. We'll have marigolds, certain things that like the bad bugs love those plants even more than cannabis. So then we can see on those plants when we have a pest problem before it's cannabis. They'll go from like cannabis to those plants. It also makes the greenhouse way more pretty and colorful.
Really helps with the feng shui of the greenhouse. Yeah,
it's way cheaper. But beneficial insects, like you have to put those in at certain times because it takes a while for their population to get up. And if they don't have a food source, they die. So you're always introducing those. But a big thing to know, lots of other crops are different, but beneficial insects for cannabis, you have to be careful about buying from operators that they sell you the eggs of those on sawdust, because that sawdust is cellulose and it'll get stuck in a bud. And then that's where rot will start to happen from the sawdust of something that you were using to introduce eggs into a greenhouse. So there's other products that we use, not a problem to share like some of those resources in the future, but my IPM programs usually cost less than $2,000 a month per acre.
Nice.
We don't have like pesticide issues. We only use organic based products. Never use anything in a facility that's not food grade ever, be it packaging, be it sprays. Just think every product you ever make is for your sick, dying grandma, and every one of your employees is your mom. You would never put them in a situation that would hurt them. So like, even though you might make a little more money doing something long term, it's going to cost you the world. So like, you got to be so mindful in your operations, because getting that paper, the piece of paper, is one thing for the license. Keeping it, maintaining it, running it, getting to like your certificate of occupancy, your grand opening. Most people I see win licenses in states, less than 50% of them even get to a grand opening. That's where the real work happens after getting the license. But that's the gatekeeper. And if you do anything other than focus on your license before you got it, you're wasting time on the wrong things in the wrong order.
Nice.
Yep. Hey, Nick, I want to thank you for stopping by the show and dropping a whole bunch of knowledge and wisdom on our audience that is hopeful in the cannabis entrepreneurial world, which is still pretty new, but highly regulated.
And, good pun indeed. I would have joined you on your 420 break, minus being in Wisconsin, my home state as a kid. But when I cross the border here in about 20 minutes after this, I'll make sure to support the Illinois very limited operators with their very expensive product, because then I got to cross through Nebraska and Kansas, and let's just say the tri-states.
Wow.
There, just only enjoy where it's legal.
Yeah.
Definitely been.
I feel so bad about Wisconsin. You're from there. That's where I went to law school, and I still have my stupid law license there. It's an inactive status, but like, it's a diploma privilege. You graduate from law school, they swear you in the next day. It's amazing. And so, but they have absolutely zero license game. They don't have medical. They don't have adult use. They got squat, and it has to do with redistricting. And so like the gerrymandering that's gone on, and people are like, oh, I can't believe that sometimes you get political. I'm like, I'm just mentioning voting records. Don't think that I'm passing judgment on people, but for some reason, 98% of the time they vote against it. Why do you think safe banking got stripped? You think it was because, Bernie Sanders said, take it out of there? Come on.
Seriously.
Oh, Bernie, miss Bernie.
But Schumer's no better, because he can just pass the MORE Act, put it on the floor. Let's do it.
At least they don't have line item veto like Wisconsin does for governor privileges.
Oh, goodness.
Wow.
Well, we've ended this on a positive note and kept it light. Nick, where can people find you?
3ccannabis.com. Nick at multiversecap.com as well. We've got a couple hundred different companies that we've invested into and started working with. We're always raising from additional accredited investors and deploying capital to good opportunities. And at the end of the day, I'm mission driven to make sure that people have access to this plant. We don't kill the planet in doing it. And we've got once in a lifetime to work together to do this. So I never thought I'd be doing cannabis 100% of the time, 16 years now, but it's really the only thing worth doing. So if you need any help with operations, advice on licensing, good vendors, been around for a long, long time, and our name's all that we've got. So definitely feel to reach out if you have any questions or we can help.
Cool. All right, guys.
Sweet.
Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.
All right.